Hello and welcome to episode 78 of the Machine Ethics Podcast. This time we're chatting with Nadia Piet, and this interview was recorded on the 30th of May 2023. We chat about how design can co-create AI, what the role for designers are in AI services, post-deployment design, narratives in AI development and AI ideologies such as long-termism, economic prosperity, transhumanism and much more, augmented creativity, new AI perspectives, as well as situated intelligences. If you like this episode, you can find more at machine-ethics.net, or you can contact us at hello@machine-ethics.net. You can follow us on Twitter, machine_ethics, Instagram, Machine Ethics Podcast, and if you can support us on Patreon at patreon.com/machine ethics. Thanks very much and hope you enjoy. Hi Nadia, thanks for joining us on the podcast. If you could introduce yourself, tell me who you are and what do you do?
Of course. Thank you for the invite, and happy we could finally make this happen after way too many back and forths over the past months. Happy to join you. So I'm Nadia Piet. I am a designer, researcher, and the founder of AIX Design. I also think of myself as a perpetual sort of slashy. So usually that job title changes every few months depending on what I'm working on. And so right now I'm putting together like an arts residency. So maybe I would add like cultural producer or something like that. And sometimes I teach quite a lot or help develop like educational programs. So then maybe educator fits in there. But mostly design and research at the moment.
Yeah. And we were talking briefly before. So you're kind of working for yourself. So you have all these things that you like to do. And I think some of those things you've just talked about there. And is AIX Design kind of a company, a community? What is that sort of thing?
Great question. We're in the process of figuring that out ourselves, to be honest. So it started sort of as basically just a Slack group that came out of my work, right? So 2018, I started doing this research around AI and design, which was actually at the time for my bachelor thesis. And I felt like I had learned so much and gone through all these like ideas and insights, and I wanted to share them in a way that wasn't just my little paper for school. So then I made a toolkit, which was called AI Meets Design Toolkit, and I just made it like a free PDF downloadable. And then so much response came from that, from people I knew, but especially people I didn't know actually. And I thought, hey, these people should talk to each other, not just to me. So basically, I had just set up this Slack group, was really low key, just like, hey, are you thinking about these things too? Coming out with us. I think you were in there quite early, actually. Maybe like 2019, 2020, something like that. So it started literally like that. And then it sort of evolved into like, we started doing events online, mostly some in person, started like writing content or just meeting up in small groups to share ideas or like exchange knowledge and so on. And soon enough, of course, these things start taking off. Sort of a life on its own. So on the one hand, it's really exciting because it's like community driven, and so people have this space to initiate and sort of co-create or like just do whatever they find meaningful. On the other hand, I did find myself spending a shit ton of time holding these, like facilitating these spaces, both, spatially time-wise, but also just like making processes and stuff. So the last year has been a bit of like, okay, we want to keep doing this work. We want to actually be doing way more of it. But I can't just work, 40 hours a week for free because I have rent to pay like everyone else. And I also want to get other people involved that also have rent to pay like everyone else. So right now we're very much in this process of figuring out how we can do the type of work we want to be doing that we find like meaningful and exciting, while also figuring out how that can help pay rent so that we can actually give that time and make that time for this work. So we're now sort of creating a for hire. So it's like AIX Design Community is one branch, and then AIX Design for Hire, in which basically we want to work with all the people in the community, but for companies, organizations, institutes that are also working through these questions and might need some more, brains on board.
Yeah. And if anyone isn't thinking in this way already, what are those questions? What are those things that people in the community are finding together or asking or are trying to work out, how their work actually applies to this space?
Yeah, there's a lot of them. Like, could probably make a huge mind map. I started very much from this idea of like, how can design play a role in shaping AI and AI development? So like, how can this way of working and thinking, like design thinking and all those methodologies, and sort of this, way of thinking about like trade-offs and like collaborative sessions, like how can we bring those methodologies into AI development, which is, very just tech driven, and sort of adopts that like agile workflow from software, and sometimes forgets, this has also changed, but so that was the first thing. And also, what is the role of like designers, like UX designers, strategic designers, service designers? Like, which kind of like literacy do they need? What is their role in the team? How can they take that role in like an AI team of actually shaping the user experience and the output, even when they don't have this like deep technical knowledge? So that was very much the beginning. And then a bit later, I got also very interested in, so that's like design for AI. And then later, I also got really interested in AI for design, which is more like how does AI or machine learning or these sort of like computational approaches show up in creative practice, which could be like graphic design, but we're also running other programs exploring just like, like writing, any sort of image making, right? So also like film or animation, but also like music or sound design. So sort of across even like, I don't know, performance art, like choreography, right? Like how can AI and ML sort of play an interesting role in that, which has obviously since then exploded. And then, the past year, so much has happened. So we're asking different questions now, I would say, which are more, also a bit more like critical and a bit more, structural, maybe political even, but like not loving the AI space right now. And the sort of like discourse and the ideologies and the narrative surrounding it, not very into it. So we're just asking like, what are alternative ways of thinking about and making AI that do resonate with like other types of values that are not just efficiency, profit, maximizing value for stakeholders, which I get we live in that world, but there's more to the world. So now our questions are much more in that space.
To you, we've said, let's say we've said AI and we've said design a lot. What is that AI aspect to you? And I put it to you that actually that design thing is quite nebulous as well. So, and you've outlined some of the stuff that you would say is design or part of that design process. From the sounds of it, you're kind of designing for the people in that AI space, as well as the AI doing some design or being part of design practice. So I just wondered if you had an idea of what that AI bit was to you. What is AI? And also like, what's the intersection of that AI and design thing?
Yeah, absolutely. Big questions, hey? So I'll start, for me, AI is, I often, when people ask that, start just sort of rambling all the things it's not. Right? It's not like an entity. It's not a sort of person or like creature, even though it may feel like that at times, and even may be helpful to adopt that mental model at times. It's not that. It's statistics on steroids. And another thing that I feel like is a sort of myth surrounding it that's not helping is like, it's actually super labor intensive. And before you would see that, right? So like 2 years ago, if you were trying to create images with like a style gun, you had to go through so much labor of like collecting the data and, you know, really making it like cleaning your data set and perfecting it. And if one thing would be wrong, the whole thing would break. And sort of that training, which is very like human labor intensive process, but also sort of ecologically and like politically, so many decisions are made along the way. AI doesn't just sort of like happen. It's not, you know, deterministic, like we don't have to do that or do it in any sort of way. It's not unavoidable. We choose to make it, and we choose to make it in a certain way. But for me, really high level, it is like, yeah, computers learning, right? So there's a difference of programming being like, you have to write the rules and then there's an output, but it's like you have to explicitly set each step in each rule. Yeah, for me, it's just like machine learning, basically that definition that I often, as a term and as a definition, find more helpful to think about. Right, so it's like instead of writing out the steps, getting the output, it's like you show the output and try, you know, ask the machine to sort of retrace those steps, which I think is super fascinating because it might actually find some stuff that we can't see, that we don't get, just because our brains do not work in that way. I can literally remember like, you know, a string of 5 numbers, and then my brain's like can't compute, which is so, you know, dumb in a way when you compare it to like the sort of capabilities a machine has or a computer has. So I think that's really exciting. Also as an idea, basically. And then AI for me is just sort of this idea of like making computers do things that we thought only humans can do, and that in a way, which I think that's quite a common definition, is quite interesting, because how about like all the other types of intelligences, right? Like we humans think we're so badass, but like there's lots of other very interesting capabilities, like fungi and, you know, octopus and like all these like forests, like trees, how they communicate stuff. This stuff is insane, right? So we are also creating AI or thinking of AI very much from a like human perspective, which I guess we can't escape in a way. But I find that quite interesting as well about this intelligence bits, like how we define intelligence is very based on how we do, which is very much like language and stuff. But what if we based it on like other intelligences? Suddenly it would take on a whole different sort of shape or form. But yeah, for me, AI, I think are those definitions, but I'm putting lots of like little asterisks around them, you know, verbally, like making a million footnotes around it. And then your question around what's at the intersection with AI and design is kind of like the one I mentioned, but there's like many ways in which they sort of meet or intersect or are entangled. So one is this idea of like design for AI. So how can we bring sort of design thinking process and those things into AI development, so that it's like human, you know, centered instead of sort of tech driven. But another big one that I'm really into is sort of UX of AI as well, which is like, great, there's all these decisions that are made along the way, and there's this like really complex system of work, but ultimately I'm probably interacting on this like tiny little screen. It's like the ultimate user interface is just that. So how do you use that tiny little like, you know, screen to make things explainable or to allow for more like agency and autonomy? And how do you translate those really big like ethical principles of what responsible AI is into a freaking button? Because in the end, I am looking at buttons most of the time, right? So it's like, I get that that's very limited and very hard, but that is ultimately where most users are interfacing with your system. So I think that's quite an interesting thing. And then, yeah, it's like augmented creativity, right? Like how can we develop new type or new layouts or new, I don't know, forms. Especially in storytelling, I think is really interesting, like new forms of storytelling that are less spending and less like maker and viewer, but are much more sort of co-creative and generative through the viewer, the maker, and a machine or whatever models you would be running there. And then there's also just like educational design, or sort of like how do we design materials or whatever to help people build up like sort of data and digital literacy, which you could say is like not design, but there is a sort of design element to that. So like for me, almost everything's design, which I get is like maybe not helpful, but I feel like bringing that approach of like intentionally creating something with a certain intended output, that's design for me. So that like, that sort of translates to almost any discipline.
Yeah. I think
Yeah.
design for me is like that. I think, like you were saying, but it's also kind of like you're bringing it to the fore. You're saying we are doing some design, and therefore we are reflecting on that design. We are
Yeah.
critiquing it. We are
And the decisions.
exactly because
Yeah.
developers and
Yeah.
project managers and all sorts of people do some of that design work, but then I guess usually there's air quotes here again, is up to the a designer or someone who is taking hold of that design to then reflect on it, critique it, make sure that it's right for purpose, it's going to work with whatever the user group is intended, it's not going to have unintended consequences for that user group. You know what I mean? That's maybe the design element, maybe, even though there is,
Yeah.
it's spread out almost, really.
Yeah, exactly. And it's not like just designers do design, but I think, yeah, exactly, like highlighting them as like design decisions. Yeah, it's like literally, just like marking it
Yeah.
up as that, I think is, yeah, exactly. It's like invites people to be a bit more conscious and reflective, and to talk about things more together, which I think is a good, space to be in to make decisions better than like, I don't have time, I'm just going to go with this.
Yeah. This works, so that's fine.
Yeah,
Done.
we always do it like this. So
Yeah.
yeah,
That's right. It's funny because when I think about a lot of this stuff, I feel like we have the same direction of travel, let's say, but we are talking with different language. So, where do you think design can make more ethical services? Let's say, taking the idea of kind of let's say what we were referring to responsible AI, but how does design play into the ethical, responsible palette when it comes to designing AI services? And just a leading question, but like for me, it's a lot of design. It's a lot of that is helpful, and it can lead you down that path in a useful way, or not, I guess, as well.
yeah. A few weeks back, I had to speak at this conference, and my colleague and program manager Ploy had to as well. And she had this slide, and I was like, oh, now I'm trying to like remember the slide because she had sort of like synthesized all these things that we've been talking about in a very fragmented way, just in our like check-ins, into this like one perfect slide. But I think it was around sort of the design, how does design or this right way of working show up in the different stages? So it's like before you decide to even make a thing, right? Like how do you scope it based on what? Like what are your motivations? Like who are you addressing or serving or targeting, however you want to put that, right? And so even before that, and then how can you like co-create the thing with them, right? So like user research, but even pushing it a bit further than that, sort of participatory design. And then also very much after, which is something that I actually don't hear, I hear less, like fewer people about, which is, okay, I hear people doing like user research, all of these things, but also afterwards, so I think you mentioned it as well as like unintended consequences. And especially with AI, it's a big thing because it's a bit unpredictable sometimes, and you cannot just test through all the happy and unhappy user flows, right? That just doesn't go in this scenario. Um, so I think we need to also look at design sort of post deployment, like how, yeah, like what levers or feedback mechanisms do users have to, I don't know, examine, to intervene, to opt out, to ask questions to the system, to flag when something doesn't feel right for whichever reason, right? Which is not just like thumbs up, thumbs down. It's like right, wrong, because yeah, life is not really just like that. You know, it's not just right or wrong. It's often like maybe you even understand why the system made a certain prediction, but like in this specific context, it's different. Um, so I think having more of that sort of dialogue as well, if you will, with the user and the system would be super helpful. And then kind of go back, right? So you actually sort of do this iterative design approach, which is ultimately, yeah, I think designers are often used to this like iterative approach, which also makes you a bit humble and like, you know, you don't have it all figured out, and that's okay. And I think that's a helpful also mindset to be in. So I think, yeah, design shows up in all these like different stages, but the one that I'm not seeing as much, especially when it comes to like responsible AI and like who gets to decide that, right? It's like you do an audit once and it's fine. Someone says it's fine. It's like, well, what if someone else is not fine? Where do they go with their experience? So yeah, I think especially in responsible AI, I would love to see a bit more of that, like post deployment design as well. Yeah, and through all the stages, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, it's very contextual, isn't it? These types of services could be a whole
Yeah,
plethora of things, you know. But you'd hope that something which was
yeah,
serious, impactful, life changing, all that sort of stuff would have some levers and things, interactions that someone had built in so that people don't just get that computer says no situation, you know, and you're like,
yeah. But
well,
why?
what do I do now? Like, I need this
Yeah,
thing, you know. So any designers out there, get on it, sort it out, and join the AI X design community. Is that right?
yes.
Yes.
Yeah, exactly. Because it's not like, you know, and I know so much has happened over the past years, but it does actually still feel like it's early,
Mm,
especially when it comes to these things, right? So, like, generative AI capabilities have exploded, just not overnight. Like,
mm,
it's been years, but it did happen so fast. Like, that exponential, you know, factor was very, like, observable, and it was quite freaky. But
mm,
interaction design and those things are not not as exponential, you know, because it needs people to like think through them and test things out and test them
mm,
in the world, kind of. And yeah, I feel like around those topics, and also, yeah, responsible AI, which is also, you know, part design, but also of course like law and legislation and regulation and all of that. When it comes to all of those other things, it's so early.
yeah.
So yeah, there's lots of work to do. Nobody has the answers, but we try.
Yeah, we're working out. So looping back around, when you were talking about the ideology, the prominent kind of thrust in the industry at the moment, and I noticed obviously there was a recent post on the Slack group which had this kind of, it's feeling a bit of a downer at the moment because of some of these things. Like, what do you feel like that kind of prominent ideology is, or, and where's that coming from? Do you think? What's you know what's the issue here? That is
Yeah, I mean, there's so much to unpack, and I do not have like the geopolitical brain. Like,
yeah.
I do not, by all means, I'm like read enough or, you know, smart enough to try and like summarize this, but I'll try
Hmm.
anyway.
Hmm.
Um, for me, it's just, and I find this quite interesting because it comes back in so many conversations and panels, right? You're like, what's wrong with AI and the dark side of AI and all of these things? And there are problems that are specific or semi-specific to AI, or like amplified, or, you
Mm.
know,
Yeah.
sort of get, yeah, worsened by it. But a lot of it is just with existing problems of the world that are then, you know, become much bigger, just like existing inequalities and bias and discrimination, capitalism and the way that sort of, just like economical divides, and the way that's like structured on a global scale, which is just not really working for anyone, except for a few people who are just having a grand time, and they are funding like so much of this work, right? And so they get to have a say, more say than others in what that is going to look like. And for me, right now, a lot of these developments are driven by specific like agenda and ideology. That is a quite dominant and regular one, but like I do not, subscribe to at all. And it's even some of these things of like long termism, right, which there has been some like critique around, and that one is very obvious. Like a lot of the people who are funding and being funded and doing like huge work in the AI space, they're public about supporting this ideology of long-termism, which is essentially like prioritizing potential future happiness for some people that do not even yet exist. Happiness being economical prosperity, right? That is sort of a thinking step there as well. As like, oh, if we can make the future rich, then people will be happy. I'm like, that's not like, I'm not really seeing that because that's not what's happening now. But okay, and then I'm like, there's so many things going on now. Like, there's problems now that we need to solve. There's lived experiences of people breathing at the moment, and like, why wouldn't we prioritize, the here and now and near future, and instead sort of hide into a further future, which is like intellectually interesting to think about, but it's just quite a bit detached from from making sort of actual impact on things that I feel need attention. So yeah, that's just a bit like painful to watch sometimes. And just like the problem of AI is the problem with capitalism. So it's like profit over anything, and it's like not like wrong necessarily with like money or business or profit or any of these things fundamentally, but there is something wrong with like putting that over any other like values, or things that we want for each other and ourselves. So yeah, and that's huge, so like who knows where to even start with that. But Abdo, who's also someone I work with a lot at AX Design, he's like, we don't have to like break the machine. Like, we don't have to take out the plug. We can just like poke sticks in the cog and hope that maybe it fucks it up a little bit. So yeah, these are huge like structural things, obviously, that are not exclusive to AI, but it does feel like the space right now is so dominated by these things that it's like not pleasant to like be in it sometimes, because you're like, this is just messed up.
And
so yeah, that's why we're starting therapy in the Slack group.
yeah. I think that'd be nice. Like, especially like I think that would be useful for me, having limited kind of internal experience with some of this. So I quite often go to companies and do consultation or discussion, or talk to business leaders or people. I don't usually have a day-to-day insight into how these decisions actually play out or get made. So it'd be nice to actually kind of take a litmus test of like where we're at. You know what I mean? Across several companies or such. That'd be quite interesting. Yeah, I was in a panel a couple of months ago, and it was self-selecting, right? It was an AI ethics thing, and a lot of the polls we did were around, are you this kind of person? Are you using some of these things? Are you thinking about it? And I think maybe half we were discussing or using responsible AI techniques or processes which you might identify as AI or ethics, some of these terms. And that was really positive. But like I said, like this is like a a couple of hundred people who are there to see a AI ethics panel. So it's like
Yeah.
all those other people who perhaps weren't there, or merely didn't have time to be there, whatever it is. What are they doing? What are they thinking about? A much broader survey would be like extremely illuminating, I think, about
Yeah.
how people are feeling about this space. And yeah, personally, I think the main issue is that capitalism aspect, which I've probably talked about in earnest on the podcast before, so sorry about that. But it's one of those things which is like obvious, like well, if we just had more social enterprises, this wouldn't be a problem, and that's already part of the system. So cool. Or like, you don't have to really break anything to make some of
Yeah.
this stuff work, actually. Or again, if you had some legislation that had to prerequisite audits for using AI services in certain ways or whatever, blah, blah, blah. And that actually might happen, as well. So there's an interesting transitional period happening, maybe constantly, but like I can feel it at the moment. There's this appetite for more direction on how to legislate
Yeah.
or how to use it in a useful, responsible way.
Yeah.
Do you have any clients who are like? I'm presuming that they're self-selecting again. Like all your clients are like, we really need this stuff because we think you're great, and we want this product to be great, and it's going to be great in X way, and it's going to be really good for people. Is that the sort of thing that people coming to you for, or are they like being smacked in the face and they're like, quick, help us?
Both.
Bit both.
Bit of both. Yeah, because I think a lot of this stuff isn't just like saying that you want to do it, right? Right? It's like much more sort of layered and complex than that, which even comes down to an individual level where you're like, oh, I didn't mean it like that. Or, you might like do something or say something and later realize, or someone points out that was not, great. And you weren't really aware of it. And it wasn't like a huge, but it's like you don't always catch it, because if you did, you would have done or said something. So it's also about yeah, it's not, sometimes people, like clients, they think they're doing great, but there's some gaps. Some people think they're doing terrible, but they're actually doing, they're showing up. So it's like that thing of I don't know what it's called, but that thing of like really smart people always think they're dumb, and really like dumb people think they're really smart. Like I see that thing with AI ethics as well, kind of, where it's like people who um yeah, how well you think you're trying isn't necessarily reflective of how your product or service actually like works and shows up for people. So I think it's a mix of people sort of all across the spectrum. Obviously, it is people who want to try. Otherwise, they would stare the other way and be like, "This girl's crazy.
Yeah.
I don't want none of this." But yeah, it's often like much more layered, or even what we were mentioning before, where it's like, oh, they've really taken care of it in part. Say they do like really rigorous like user research and really do it in the most like diverse, inclusive, like good way. But then there's nothing post deployment, no way for people to speak back. So like there's yeah, it's a mix across, and a lot of my work is also more like meta. So it's like in education, for example, or like with last year we did a big project with the ICO, right, which is like around like design for data rights, and like how do we turn these like ideas around non-discriminatory AI into like design guidelines that people in companies can actually do something with, which is then not specific to like one organization or one team. So a lot of the work is also, yeah, more like meta or more like across different organizations, which is also very interesting because you see lots of like different approaches and frictions and so on. But yeah, of course, there's a bit of self-selection there with the people I actually work with. And also for my own sanity, maybe, because I think, and it's something I've been like figuring out and thinking about, which is like rather than like fighting the system.
Mm.
Like rather than trying to break the machine or whatever, right? Trying to like fight what you don't like. It might be more helpful, fruitful, if anything, like energizing and sustainable for the individual to work on what you do want. Build a new machine, invent a new machine, whatever, right? It's like build the thing or try to imagine and craft and work towards the thing that you do want, even if it's like a shitty approximation. But like imagine what that would look like rather than just critiquing or, you know, destructing what is like trying to construct something else. So I think also, yeah, I do choose not to work with some people because I'm like, it's gonna do my head in, and I don't want that.
Okay, cool. So the final question we always ask is, what excites you and what scares you about this AI-mediated future?
What? Okay, this AI-mediated future. Can you describe that future for me a little bit?
Let's say, from what you know at the moment, projecting into the future, what is the things that you hope don't happen, and what are the things that you really hope will happen and are excited by?
Yeah. So what I hope will not happen is this, very deep like monopoly that some big tech companies are having on AI, and that being the main driver and narrative. Because from that point of view, the systems that do come into our lives, even if they work flawlessly, like computationally, they will just have values embedded that will drive us like more apart and more out of ourselves and out of each other, like not in a future I want. What I am hopeful about is that I think AI or machine learning, like as a technique, is so promising and so interesting. And we see it especially with like, I don't know, also like natural sciences or like biology or healthcare, or like we're figuring things out about the world that we didn't for a very long time, like because it's offering new perspectives and literally new ways of computing the world. And I think that's really exciting. And I think what would be really cool to see is if, and again, it's something we've been talking about in the community, instead of having artificial general intelligence, which is this idea of like one sort of chunky oracle knowing it all, we would have lots of like small situated intelligences where people and communities and groups can take machine learning models and like use them for things that they need, and that becomes like easier. So I would love if it's a bit more DIY and hackery, and people can use these technologies to decide what for them, what's going to make their life like better, nicer, more meaningful, and having, the systems or the tools to sort of do that for themselves. I think that would be really cool. I'm really excited.
Awesome. Nadia, thank you very much for your time and for coming on the podcast. How do people find out about you, follow you, all that sort of thing?
Thank you. So I've made it really easy. So I have just my real name everywhere. So that's Nadia Piet on, I don't know, Instagram, LinkedIn, Twitter, all the bits. Mastodon, Arena, all the channels. TikTok, which I'm not really on, but I have an account. And then AIX Designs, AIX X Design, and also basically the same name everywhere. Website is aixdesign.co, so not com but co, like community on. And from there you can get lost in all the links and all the different channels and all the work we've done. And if you have any questions, ideas, you want to contribute or join the community, or you're doing other work in this space, then you can always reach out. And I'd love to hear from you.
Awesome. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Ben. Nice to meet you.
Hi, and welcome to the end of the podcast. Thanks again to Nadia. And again, I'm really glad that we managed to put in the time, make it work. So that's awesome. And again, do check out the AIX Design community. for more information and just sharing insights and interesting links and research and all that sort of stuff. There's also been a lot of chat with other people I've been talking to about these kind of AI ideologies, some of which are coming out from the West Coast America, and whether they are kind of inherently bad. We talked a bit about this on the podcast with Nadia, and I'm kind of on the fence because there's some of the ways of thinking could be useful, or you can take what you need from them, and I'm not necessarily yet in the whole camp of let's put a name on it, brand them and tell them that they're bad. It seems a bit of a kind of a binary choice to me. I think there's probably some good things to take and some good things and some less good things that we can leave about some of those ideologies, those kind of narratives that we're being fed in this space. But it's very interesting to have these conversations. So let's keep doing that at least. So again, thanks for listening. And if you can, so you can support us on patreon.com/machine ethics. And until next time, goodbye.